You're listening to the Shiftwork Podcast, episode 68. Today is part 3 of the series on building resilience, and I get into how we use our ego as part of our subconscious mind to be able to control our processes and to build a more resilient lifestyle. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Luke Lehman, and you're listening to the only podcast for high-growth entrepreneurs rooted in business strategy and tactics as we discover the habits of high-performance leaders and dive deep into brain science. With over 2 decades leading high-performance teams, from fighter pilot to CEO, I'm excited to join you in your entrepreneurial journey. Shift the mindset needed to build your empire, keep more money in your pocket, and enjoy every day of the journey. Welcome to Shiftwork. Welcome back. I am truly grateful that you are here today. Today is part 3 of the series on building resilience. As we wrap this up, this is my parts of the book, parts 1, 2, and 3. And next week, we're going to go into interviews with the other authors who will share incredible experiences with you about their own journeys. And I don't want to foreshadow too much. I'll let those episodes stand alone for you, but just to give you a little peek behind the curtains about what's coming. It's exciting. If you're new to this podcast, if you've heard me speaking on building resilience, if you've heard me on social media, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. I'm excited to join you on your journey. This episode, part 3, is about building resilience. And after I read to you the excerpt from the book, which was my portion of the writing, I'm going to share with you a little bit more of the journey for me and what happened after the writing and what happened in the level of exploration that led to what I would consider to be some real significant personal development. So today we're talking about a bias for action. And you'll listen to it here in just a moment. You'll hear the words that I wrote in the book, and then we'll have a discussion about what the bias for action means and how it applies in my own life. But also in this portion of the book, I talk about the concept of the ego. And the ego is such an interesting thing, not to be egotistical, but really based on the work of Sigmund Freud. As he describes in his psychoanalytic theory, the 3 components of the way that our subconscious works, called the ego, the superego, and the id. If you're not familiar with them, this is a great opportunity just to learn a little bit more about the way that your brain works and the way that you approach the world and the biases that you have. So I'm not going to give too much more foreshadowing. I just want to dive right in today so that we can get into this. After I wrap up the reading, I'm going to share with you a little bit more about my own journey. And I encourage you to share with me your journey, to reach out, to tag me on social media. Instagram's my flavor of choice, or just send me a message on whatever social media platform you're most active on. I'm on all of them, I think, except for Snapchat. I don't have any Snapchat. So if you're looking for me on Snapchat, I'm not on there. But send me a message and let me know what's been the most impactful for you, what's going on in your own life. If you're not comfortable tagging me in an Instagram story and you want to share it a little bit more personally in the messages, I respond to almost all of them. I do it myself. You're not going to get an assistant. I'm excited to join you. I'm excited to share with you. This is going to be a fun chapter of our lives. So let's dive right into part 3 of building resilience. In January of 1898, a rebellion broke out in Cuba against Spanish colonial rule. The United States had become involved in the conflict due to concerns about the treatment of civilians on the island and the potential impact on American business interests. In April of that year, President William McKinley called for volunteers to form a cavalry regiment to support the war effort, and a young man volunteered to lead the group. The group, formerly called the Rough Riders, was formed in early 1898, shortly after the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. It consisted of a diverse group of men from all walks of life, including cowboys, miners, college athletes, Native Americans, and Ivy Leaguers. The Rough Riders trained in Texas before shipping out to Cuba to join the fight against the Spanish forces. On July 1st, 1898, the Rough Riders and other American troops were ordered to take San Juan Hill, a strategic position held by the Spanish forces. The hill was heavily defended, and the American troops were initially met with heavy resistance. The group's leader refused to stay back with the supply unit and instead led the Rough Riders in a charge up the hill. Under heavy fire, the Rough Riders charged forward and reached the top of the hill, which gave a decisive strategic advantage to the American forces. This offensive move became one of the most celebrated moments of the Spanish-American War and earned the leader national recognition. His name? Teddy Roosevelt, who resigned as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to lead the Rough Riders. He famously said, "The man who is physically and morally clean, alert, and who has a sound body and mind is the man best fitted to meet any hardship or adversity and to fight his way to victory." This leader, who would later become president of the United States, embodied a bias for action, coined decades later by General Electric CEO Jack Welch and recently made popular by Jeff Bezos of Amazon. The term means you must be decisive, act, and make decisions quickly. Developing a warrior's mindset requires this same bias in pursuing resiliency. You can read 100 books, listen to 100 podcasts, and not increase your resilience, but you can take a single action and be on the road to a more fulfilled and engaging life. Our bias for action in fighter aviation follows the same trajectory. The concept see one, do one, teach one was introduced in the late 19th century by William Stewart to train students at Johns Hopkins University's surgical residency program. We use this same approach. As aviators, we first observe the way others perform. During pilot training, we would observe an instructor pilot demonstrate a maneuver. To first learn how to do a loop, an instructor showed the specific entry parameters like airspeed and altitudes. She would say, "We are going to begin with 300 knots of airspeed and 4,000 feet of airspace above us." As I cross-checked the instruments from the tandem cockpit, I began creating the habits that would ensure my success. She pulled the airplane into a nose-high position as the aircraft entered the pure vertical, with airspeed decaying until it reached a crescendo of fully inverted flight. At the pinnacle, the airplane was completely upside down. Looking ahead at the horizon, she pulled the airplane through, gaining airspeed and descending back to the starting position. You can gain some understanding of the requirements to complete a loop simply through the words you hear. But if it were your turn to execute the maneuver next, you would benefit from seeing me do this in real life. Building resiliency is the same. You model the behaviors of those around you who have accomplished your desired level of resiliency. If someone is a train wreck, you don't look to them for counsel. To become the most elite version of yourself, you will learn it. Then you will do it and teach it. This chapter is the learn it, and your bias for action must include the do and teach. What I discuss here is neither intuitive nor natural. You will do this by looking at yourself first, then developing the levels of empathy and awareness to lead others. Even in the infancy of building resiliency, you will experience the personal rewards of living a more fulfilled life with a level of intellectual curiosity that opens new levels of happiness not previously attainable. There is one hurdle between you and a much better life. Unfortunately, most have never taken the time to understand what it is and how it affects every decision you make in your life. It can be defined as your sense of self-esteem and self-importance. The single hurdle is your ego. This draws a distinction between being egotistical, which carries a clearly negative connotation. Being egotistic is associated with being conceited or excessively absorbed in oneself. But no, the ego is quite the opposite. Every single one of us has an ego. Its job is to sort out what's real and to make sense of the world we see. You've got one. Let's put it to work. Has someone ever blamed you for having too big an ego or said, your ego gets in your way? If so, this chapter will completely reframe everything you think you know about your own biases and gain an understanding of how others see the world. To understand the ego, we look to the work of Australian neurologist Sigmund Freud, whose 1923 work defines the three parts of our mind. This study of human function identifies the id, pronounced exactly like you think it sounds without an apostrophe, ego, and superego. Distinctively, these functions are not solely brain-based, but comprise the entirety of your operating system at the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious levels. If being egotistical is considered socially harmful, the ego is neither good nor bad. It is simply your view of the world. It is based on your learned and lived experiences and represents the purest and most authentic version of you. I don't see how that can be bad at all. According to Freud's psychoanalytic theory, the id is the most primitive component and is part of the mind that contains sexual and aggressive drives as well as hidden memories. You are born with this. It is designed to do one thing: keep you safe. It is almost purely subconscious and is the driving force of your personality. If the tip of the iceberg you see above the water is your conscious mind, the id is the remainder of the iceberg below the water. The ego is a matured phase that develops from the id. It validates impulses of the id and creates an acceptable expression in the real world. The filter often helps you keep your mouth closed when you have nothing nice to say. Ego is not your personality. Instead, it is only one component. The ego is like the driver of a sports car. The car has the power and force, but the driver gives it direction and purpose. The superego operates as a moral compass and begins to form around the age of 5. The first of 2 parts, the conscience, discerns what society views as good or bad. The second part, ego ideal, includes the rules and standards the ego aspires to. All 3 components, the id, ego, and superego, act in tandem and keep each other in harmony. However, individually, they work in isolation and create behaviors that we view as bad. A person with a dominant id would become survival-focused or impulsive. They would act upon their most basic urges with minimal regard for whether their actions were appropriate, much less moral or legal. An overly dominant superego might lead to a highly judgmental personality. Let's say you walk into a supermarket while you are hungry and see a delicious, hot sandwich. The id suggests immediate consumption of the sandwich to satisfy hunger. At the same time, the superego counteracts that desire by applying a moral direction that says you can't immediately stuff the sandwich in your face. The key to a healthy ego is a balance between all 3. Think about your own life right now. Do you tend to be impulsive? Are you historically judgmental? There is no right or wrong. There is simply what is true for you right now and a representation of the best version of you. In high-performance teamwork, we look at the plan, brief, execute, debrief cycle. Its application has as much, if not more, application in developing your own warrior's mindset as it does in any team life cycle phases or events. There is no secret that mastery for fighter pilots occurs in the debrief. We use a description of the debrief that says, take the rank off. We mean creating an environment free of judgment and blame that focuses on the quality of our decisions. Building resilience follows the see one, do one, teach one model. In the pages of Building Resilience, you have discovered the characteristics or will discover the behaviors of highly resilient leaders with incredible pedigree and resumes. Individually, each author describes a lifetime of learning that compounds during each hardship endured to create a more resilient life. Our approach has no hubris, only a level of curiosity that compels us to believe that the best is yet to come. Resilience is a learned skill. It is best learned by being both a student and a teacher, or better put, a player coach. Being in the game means having a bias for action, being decisive, and making quick decisions. When adversity strikes, which it will, what is your action plan? Are you building the habits with each level of stress or each confrontation that will lead you to a 1% better life? There are 3 steps to creating a habit of resiliency. Step 1, state the problem. You can't fight what you can't see. You find yourself in overwhelm when things start to go wrong. It feels like everything is piling up or the odds are stacking against you. Perhaps a few things need attention, but it's not a matter of swinging away on everything at once. Instead, it's a matter of figuring out what alligator is nearest to the boat and acting decisively. When stating the problem, be specific. What about the problem is challenging? What impact is this adversity having on your life? What are the contributing factors that are making the situation worse? Step 2, accept your role. In the previous episode, we discussed being a victim or a victor. Which one are you? In any adverse situation, you must stop and look at the part you play. By accepting responsibility, you put power back into your ability to overcome any challenge. Adversity comes in all shapes and sizes, but how we respond is where our true freedom begins. In step 3, identify the outcome. What would you like to happen? If you get mired down in the circumstances, you will continue to focus on the challenges. You don't get what you want in life. You get what you tolerate. By setting your intentions on a future state you desire, you begin to move your focus to that outcome. Where your intention goes, your attention follows. And where your attention goes, your energy flows. By discovering our own biases, we can show empathy in the exploration of others. The same questions we ask ourselves become the foundations for success in leading others. The entry point in any discussion on resilience is very simple: grace. We owe ourselves the grace that we are doing our best and working to make 1% changes in our lives. Extending that same level of grace to those around us creates the foundations for a more resilient team. When we ask the same questions of them that we ask of ourselves, we transition from player to coach. Because you are armed with the mechanics of resiliency, you can lead others. You have the upper hand because you have knowledge reserved for high-performance teams. As you lead conversations with others going through challenging situations, you must do so with a level of understanding and empathy that allows them the same sense of discovery you have achieved. And at the end, you can rest easy, knowing that you are doing the work on yourself and leaving behind a trail of better humans. As we wrap up part 3 of this series on building resiliency, I'm excited that we were able to share the first portion of this, which was my contributions to this book, but I'm really excited in the next few weeks to introduce you to the co-authors. Each of these individuals are incredible leaders with just phenomenal experiences inside the military, inside the business world, as spouses. They're just great humans, and I'm excited to introduce you to them. But today I want to explore a little bit more with you about the concept of bias for action. And in writing this book, one of the key takeaways was the intellectual rigor required to be able to put something in front of you that was thought-inspiring, energy-inducing, that was well-articulated, well-researched, and something that you can consume in a simple manner and that you can take action on. But the bias for action is something that was a very interesting discovery for me, and part of my own life's ambitions and desires is to gain a broader understanding of the way that you see the world, the way that others see the world, the way that my wife sees the world, my children see the world, my employees see the world. And as I can get a better understanding of their lives and the way that they put their reality together, the way that you put your reality together, I can be a more effective leader. I can be a better person. So there's some level of selfishness associated with that. And the bias for action is very interesting because what I realized in the process is that my own bias for action varies significantly from many of those around me. And that was presented to me most clearly by my brother, who showed a mirror to me and what my own life looks like and what that impact has around others. And I realized that many of the components of my life, many of my own biases for action, cause a ripple effect in those around me. And I'll give you just a short story. I have found in my life that it's not that bad things happen around me, it's that I'm attuned to it. And I feel an obligation to help. I think by nature, I am a helper, I am a provider, I am a protector. And the example that my brother gave back to me when studying for my airline transport pilot's license was there was a car accident outside of the library that I was studying in Coronado, California. And I immediately hopped up from the table and went outside to see if there was a way to assist. And in this case, it wasn't. It was not a big deal. And I don't even really remember the story until my brother brought it up. But I do remember many instances in my own life of a bias for action. And I recall another event in California, driving out to Palm Springs from San Diego area, and there was a massive car accident. As I drove up on it, one of the first ones, there was a car in the wrong direction in my lane that had spun or however they had gotten there. And I don't particularly think there's a lot of value to the gory components of this, but there was no first responders there. I had a wife and a child in the back of the car, and Jenny was surprised that I hopped out. Why would someone get out of the car? Because of the bias for action. Because I am the type of person that is a helper, and I want the best for others. And as I began to triage, I found one person who was not alive, others that were seriously wounded. And I began to organize and put my training in the military and really just some basic first aid type actions to work to help these people until the first responders could get there. And then when the first responders showed up, I was able to say, you need to go here first, there second, there third. And, I don't say that because I feel like I actually really added a whole lot of value that day. What was surprising to Jenny was that I got out of the car. And as I continued in my own understanding of this bias for action, I was reminded of another story. One of the first flights that I had on Delta Airlines was supposed to originate in Atlanta and fly to San Diego. And as I boarded the airplane, I recall having a slice of pizza in my hand, and I sat it down in the first officer's chair, and the lead flight attendant comes up and says, "Sir, there's a medical emergency in the back. Just want to let you know." I said, "Okay, is there anything I can do to help?" "Nope, got it all handled." So I set my stuff down, set my bag down in the cockpit, threw some switches around to begin to ready the airplane. Generally, the flight attendants are going to have it covered. It's generally not a big deal. And as I walked back, I saw that a man, probably in his 70s, had fallen out of his chair and was laying in an otherwise empty airplane. I'm like, well, that's probably not good. I think we're off to a great start here. So I said, "I don't think this looks very good. Do you need any help now?" "Yes, sir, we do need help." And I called out, "Is there a doctor, nurse, anybody around?" But the airplane was otherwise empty. There wasn't anyone on the airplane to help. Again, I go back to my just really basic medical training in the military. I didn't particularly, it's not like it's advanced medical training. It's just self-aid buddy care, how to keep someone alive. And I began to do CPR on the man. Now, side story. If you've never done CPR, if you've been trained in it, they tell you that one of the first things that's going to happen is that the ribs are going to break if you're doing it correctly. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I am not that kind of guy. I am super queasy. I don't like seeing blood. But sure enough, as I began to conduct CPR, the ribs broke and I got a little wince. Oh, man. But I continued and did what was necessary until the true first responders were able to arrive. I only share those stories with you today to give you a glimpse into my own bias for action. For clarity, I do not subscribe to this modern work culture of taking massive action. I actually subscribe to something completely different. I subscribe to consistency. I subscribe to living a life of intentional alignment, being focused on all the components of your life, of health and wealth and relationships, and that they all exist symbiotically. I subscribe to grace. I subscribe to compassion. I subscribe to the fact that you are enough in the current version of yourself. So if you have a bias for action, much like me, great. If you work till your fingers bleed, I guess also great, but that's your choice. If you don't particularly have a bias for action, that's also okay, which is really the entry point for today. And in this discovery process, what I realized was that my own bias for action has the potential to have a negative connotation on those around me. Why? How? In my own business, the way that it shows up is aspirational for some, but overbearing for others. The way that I can consistently generate high energy actions day in and day out seems as though it's a bit daunting for others. For someone who has less of a bias for action, that energy that I portray can be overbearing. So really in the writing of this book, what was the most interesting was that a lot of the discoveries that I had about self, about awareness, resulted in the way that I am portrayed or the impact that I have on others. And it's most notable as many things in my own home life. When I look at what happens around my wife or my children, you might be able to imagine that that level of high energy seems to be somewhat unsustainable. Or for my wife that doesn't particularly enjoy people hopping out at scenes of accidents when she would rather have her husband in the car with her. What I wasn't particularly present to was what her needs were. So sometimes that bias for action is good. Perhaps it's neither good nor bad. Perhaps it is just the way that you approach the problems in your own life. If you're a high energy, high performer like I am, perhaps we look around and we see how we can give grace to others and allow them to work at their own time, for them to be able to develop their own sequence of solutions. And perhaps if you're not someone that's spring-loaded to a bias for action, perhaps you can garner a little bit of awareness from others about how you can move more specifically to an end state that you desire for yourself, and how you can move towards a bias for action that allows you to take consistent, clear actions aligned with your values. I often say that action brings clarity. And this bias for action, if you find yourself stuck or unsure or unable to determine what the next steps are, there is an enormous amount of science, an enormous amount of success stories that by simply moving your feet, by taking action, by making choices, that you'll move closer to the thing that you want in your life. So this bias for action was an interesting discussion, but not because I'm preachy, not because I want you to follow the same level of consistency for me, but that you simply begin to find the rhythm for yourself that makes you become a more resilient person, that you can move through those negative feelings and emotions, that you can process them, that you can have them, that you can learn what you need to learn, that you can give yourself the grace, and then you can move forward and you can do it at the pace that makes the most sense for you, that leads you to becoming the healthiest, best version of yourself. So what is your bias for action? I will tell you that in the writing of this book, one of the things that was so important was that I developed that intellectual rigor, as I mentioned early, that I put in the reps, that I did the research, that I did the editing to make sure that every word had meaning and was designed to serve you. So I believe that there is some level of obligation for me as an author to be able to give you something that you can take action on that's worthy of you reading and spending your time and energy against. But I also find value in simply the process of the exploration of the writing. So as I wrap up the third of these series here and we move into these interviews with other authors of this book, I encourage you to let your bias for action to involve journaling. There's something powerful about using pen or pencil, but the mechanical instrument of writing with your hand on a piece of paper, not typing with your thumb on your phone or banging it out on a computer, but physically using your hand to record data. It connects muscles inside your body. It's the way that your body is designed to work, to reinforce those components of learning. So the bias for action may simply be a level of exploration to say, what am I feeling here? What is it that's causing it? What am I actually experiencing? What do I actually want to happen? Going through the 3 steps that we discussed earlier for you to be able to find a solution that works for you in a manner that works for you, and to reach out and get help where you need it, or to find a resource, or simply to allow the universe to go to work for you. So what can you commit to today? Can you commit to a journaling exercise? Can you commit to a level of intellectual curiosity and intellectual rigor that allows you to become more curious about yourself? Perhaps it's the understanding of how the ego and the superego and the id operate with each other. Perhaps it's an understanding of how your own biases affect your decision-making and your leadership, or simply just how you approach the world. So today, I encourage, I advocate that your bias for action includes a journaling practice that allows you to go through the same process that I did and to uncover things that you didn't yet know about yourself. My friends, I'm excited to share this journey with you. As I wrap this episode up, I want to share again that all of the proceeds of this book are going to be donated to the charities of the author's choosing. You can find that published on my website about who I donate to and where I allocate my time and my money. And I think it's just such a powerful opportunity. As you may be listening to this podcast because you saw me speaking on stage, and you can find out a little bit more about the journey that I'm on and the journey that I want to share with you in helping you become the future next best version of yourself. So I thank you in advance for your support. I thank you for spending the money on the book. I thank you for the impact that it's going to have on the charities, and that those people will then be able to go forward and do great things in the world as well. And all on this journey of leaving behind a trail of better humans that will experience the world in a way different from you and I. So thank you, my friends, for your support. I'm excited to stay engaged with you. Please leave a comment below or tag me on social media with anything that you found important or instrumental, or things that led to a level of curiosity in you that's worthy of sharing. Have a great week, my friends. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode of the Shift Work Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you found value in today's episode, please take the time to leave a review so that we can build our community of high-growth entrepreneurs. If you'd like to stay connected with me, go to www.lukelehman.com to find a link to your social media channel of choice.